Good morning, and welcome to the B&H live stream for the Nikon Z6III. My name is Jabari, and I'm here with Deb, a wildlife photographer from Florida, and Mark, a product manager from Nikon. Deb, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
I'm Deb Sandidge. I'm located in Central Florida. I absolutely love to do wildlife photography. I do a little travel and landscape also. But for this project, I was able to do mostly photographing birds and some of the coastal areas in Florida. And it was very exciting, the new Nikon Z6III.
Awesome. There's a lot of beautiful wildlife in Florida, so I can't wait to see it. And Mark, how long have you been at Nikon?
Yeah, I've been with Nikon since 2007, if you're going to put me on the spot there. My role at Nikon is that of senior manager with the marketing department. So that's really exciting because I get to work with a lot of the talent like Deb on new launches. And I've been with the Nikon USA marketing department for about 4 years, so I've seen a lot of cool things with the Z8 and Z9, but I'm really excited about the Z6III because this is a really exciting feature set that is going to get in a whole bunch more people's hands.
Cool, cool. Yeah, there's a lot of new technology that's in this camera. And I think what people are really excited to hear about is the new sensor, this partially stacked sensor. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so if you're tuning in, I mean, we just dropped this camera in the last couple of hours, and new terminology is out there. In regards to this is the world's first partially stacked sensor. So I'll give you the Reader's Digest version. All sensors have an analog to digital converter. It has to take light, make it into a digital signal. Normally it does this very slow unless you have like a stack sensor like the Z8 and the Z9. But that takes a lot of surface area. It's a little bit more expensive to produce those cameras. You know, Z8 is about $4,000. But with this camera now, we have something called a partially stacked sensor. So we have several rows. Think about it like as a high-rise apartment. You can't buy more land in Manhattan, but you can rise them up higher. And so we have a lot more circuitry that we're able to fit in a small area and get results that approach that of a Z8 and Z9 at a fraction of the price. So ultimately, that's the real benefit of the partially stacked sensor. It's giving you the benefits of a fully stacked sensor at a fraction of the price. So things like you see on the screen, you might be seeing on the screen there in terms of the latency, the frame rates, the lack of distortion, the almost blackout-free viewfinder. We can gain all of those things in this mid-2000 price point range, which is really, really exciting. It kind of outperforms expectations of what you would think a camera of this price point would deliver.
Absolutely. I mean, it kind of feels like a lot more than just a successor to the Z6 II. This really bridges the gap between the Z6 series and your flagship cameras.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It's like it's not just the Z6 III, it's like Z6 to the power of 3. It's like exponentially better. And so for people that might be looking at this and seeing, well, you know, it's the Z6 III, I already have a Z6 II, I would invite them to really take a look at the media that we've put out there, because despite the naming convention, there's a lot more in this camera than even just the previous generation from 3 years ago. So it's really exciting.
Cool, cool. And it really does affect the way that you shoot as well. So Deb, you work a lot with the Z8, Z9 cameras?
I do. I shoot with the Nikon Z9 and the Nikon Z8. And a lot of what I hear in the field, there are people who don't quite want to reach out to the Z9 level. And also, it's a heavier camera. So if you're walking around carrying a lot of different types of camera, having a camera that's lighter, that's super powerful, has all the features that generally close to the Z8 and the Z9, that's very desirable. So they want to do bird photography, they want to do landscape photography, and perhaps they're doing a lot of hiking and a lot of activities. So the weight factor and of course the cost factor makes it very desirable.
Right. And from a video perspective, it does a lot of the same benefits because it kind of just feels like a scaled down Z9. Instead of getting 8K, you get 6K, and you still get the benefits of all that speed. You get internal RAW, because it also has the same processor as the Z8 and Z9, right? The XSpeed 7 processor.
You're correct, yeah.
So you have the internal RAW, you have 10-bit codecs, ProRes even, Nikon RAW and ProRes RAW, slow motion, There's just a lot to kind of play with in this camera. We actually got to shoot with it here at B&H. And some of the footage that we got was really a lot of fun. We got some skaters and really got to do some cool things with the skaters and slowing down motion. I think we're going to be able to play it in a few seconds on the screen here so that you can see some of it. But we were able to really just kind of stop people mid-air and kind of circle around them, do some pseudo matrix kind of moves. Lots of fun.
Yeah, there's a lot of different frame rates on the camera, and I guess we're seeing some of it now. The camera, as you mentioned, can shoot in 6K. It can even shoot at 6K 60 if you enable RAW. So this is never before seen in a camera at this price point. As you mentioned, it's using the same processor, so we can get internal RAW. Normally, the generation before this, you need an external recorder, HDMI cord, all these apparatuses in order to achieve RAW. But now you can get all of that internally, which is huge for people that are doing this type of work. A lot's changed since we launched the Z6 II. A lot of people are kind of one-man bands. They might be doing stills and video in a hybrid sort of way. But what we've unlocked with this combination of processor and the sensor itself is things like 240p in a full-frame camera with the entire viewing angle. So that is something that we've never had in any of these full-frame cameras before. We even have things like 4K 120 with a DX crop, and we even have a lot of different 6K 60p options. So the options on the camera are immense, like not only in terms of the frame rates and the resolutions, but the codecs as well, as you mentioned. So you can do RAW, but you can also do the different tone modes. You can shoot in standard, N-Log, you can shoot in H.265 codec. So whatever your workflow is, there'll be a way to optimize it for whatever you're shooting. And Deb even shot some slow-mo for us in her portion of the campaign with 240. That's one of the things we asked you to do. So how did you like that?
Oh, it was exciting to try. Having that 240 was just really an extension of reality. So you can take something that happens in a fraction of a second and be able to play that back in super slow motion. And I think that's where the beauty is. You just take something that happens in a few seconds, stretch it out, maybe 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and then you see each individual detail, and it's just magical, especially with birds, because they move so fast. You're experiencing things that your eyes and brain can't even process, but when you slow it down in post, that's where the magic happens. It's beautiful.
What's also really fascinating about this camera is that it's able to do autofocus and just about everything. That's something that is kind of unheard of as well. Like being able to do autofocus at 120 frames per second with the same level of eye tracking, smart AI-powered auto recognition detection as when you're shooting at normal frame rates. Because, just as you mentioned, you're able to see so many new things because you're stretching out this really tiny moment into a really large moment. So if it wasn't autofocusing that well, that, when it hunts, that moment would get stretched out as well. But it's tack sharp, and it's able to track them so well because that 3D autofocus that inherits from the Z8 and flagship models.
Yeah, if I can, I'll hand it to Deborah because I want her take, because she usually shoots a Z8 and Z9, so it's good to get her take on her comfort level. But from a tech standpoint, I will tell you, you hit the nail on the head in saying that the different focusing modes, you don't get, there's no drawback to them. It's always performing at the same level because of that X-Speeds processor. So you mentioned a couple of things there. You mentioned 3D tracking. So this has legitimate, bona fide 3D tracking. Previous version had something approximating that, but this is the high-end 3D tracking that incorporates subject detection. So for those people that are looking at the specs online, and if you even shot a DSLR before, you'd know what the 3D tracking is in the Nikon world. But what you haven't experienced, unless you've used the latest generation of Nikon mirrorless cameras, is the combination of 3D tracking with subject detection. So it refines the focus point to the subject that it detects, whether it's a bird or a person or a vehicle. We even have an airplane detect in this. So the 3D tracking can track your subject, but furthermore, it can refine it depending on if it detects a subject. And then on top of that, when you're shooting these fast frame rates, and if you slow it down, just like I think you were intimating, you would see something, you would see if it didn't catch up, basically. And that's what I think people would have full confidence now in shooting those slow motions and having the focus keep up. And there's no change no matter what frame rate you use. Usually there's like a caveat in all these different cameras. If you shoot fast frame rates, you can only use the center focus point. This has no caveats whatsoever. You can shoot all the different schemes, methods, auto area AF modes with whatever frame rate you're using, both in stills and in video. But, you should ask Deb here, because I think her standards, we were a little bit hesitant in asking her to shoot this because we're used to shooting the Z8 and Z9. So, Deb, what do you think of the performance of the camera, having shot at our peak flagship cameras?
Well, I was impressed because I know there's different levels of camera, and this just flowed seamlessly. It jumped right into 4K, 120 frames per second, also at 240p. Beautiful. I could trust the camera. I didn't have to worry about the focus or anything else. And it was so great to be able to shoot that in the field and then come back and then review the images and just see how clear and how beautiful and how well the camera tracked. And I'm picky because I shot with the Z8 and I shoot with the Z9. And a lot of people will ask about that. So I know this is a camera that people are going to be really interested in. If they do a lot of wildlife photography, is it going to be able to keep up? Is it going to be able to track? Will it be able to shoot the way I'm used to shooting? So this answers a lot of questions.
And then you also get the pre-release function as well.
Yes, pre-release is amazing. I don't think that people really understand that. It's just until you sit down and actually do that, how could the camera respond faster than your brain and your finger pressing the shutter? It's already captured the images, and it's just so phenomenal. It's interesting to experience, but it's more interesting to sit back and then review the images. And I got that shot, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I've dabbled a bit into bird photography myself, and the most frustrating thing is trying to find yourself in a long focal length, because it is difficult to find your subject, and then you get there and you see that magical moment and you hesitate and the bird flies away and it's gone. It's too late. But if you have the pre-capture, then even if it flew away, you can still press the button and it captured that second before, up to a second before and 3 seconds afterwards, right?
Yeah, it is. For those of you that are watching that have never experienced this, and that's the thing. Most people like shooting in our ecosystem of cameras, unless they're shooting a Z8 and Z9, wouldn't have experienced this. So I'm really excited about the Z6III coming to the market, because now people can experience exactly what we're talking about with pre-release capture. It's essentially expanding your reaction time. And that 1 second, a lot can happen in that 1 second, and it's almost like cheating. You're going back in time a full second after you're physically reacting. So some of those bird shots that we showed on screen just a second ago, we had ones there of Deb she took where the bird was just taking off. So those are great examples. We have birds in flight, which a lot of this customer base really likes, especially at this price point, and using maybe telephoto lens that are longer and maybe smaller aperture, so it's easier to wield around. We want to make this platform really a destination for bird photographers, wildlife photographers, and not only at the high end, with the 400 2.8s, but we have even 400 4.5s right now, and this system here is really commensurate with those type of lenses. So I'm really happy that we kind of democratizing now a lot of the features that are in the high-end cameras, such as the pre-release capture.
Yeah, so it really does feel like a Z9 Junior or like a 3/4 of a Z8 or something. It gives you all the tools that you need to get the image. The only thing that you're really kind of missing out on if you're kind of torn between the two cameras is the resolution, right? Because you do get more resolution with the Z8 and Z9, but in terms of actually getting the image, you have it with the Z6 Mark III. It really is fast enough to keep up with those, the flagship models. Fascinating camera to work with.
Yeah, and I'll just comment on that. So if you guys are looking online at the specs right now, you will notice that it is, in fact, a 24.5 megapixel sensor. So, which is interesting because the last couple of cameras that we released at the high end, they're 45 megapixels. And when we released the Z6 II at the time, even the Z6 I, they were always paired with the Z7 and the Z7 II. So this is the first time we're giving the Z6 its own platform. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that our 45 megapixels are now in the fully stacked sensors of the Z8 and Z9. But, we do gain things with the 24.5 megapixel, things that you can't get with a 45, such as the higher ISO. So for people that need to shoot in low light, or rather higher ISO, it gives them a little bit more latitude, a little bit more cleanliness. But furthermore, when focusing in low light, this is actually our best low light autofocus performance camera. It can shoot at -10 EV. So what, for those of you that don't know what -10 EV is, it's basically the sensitivity to how accurately it can focus with low light, and that's essentially candlelight or moonlight effectively. So and the great thing about this camera, I'm going a little bit into specs right now, but it can perform -10 no matter if the starlight view mode is on or not. So some people might key into what that means, but yeah, it's great for low light, great for autofocusing, great for higher ISO. How did you like it based on your experience with the 45 and going down to the 24? Did you what did you think of going back to the 24?
Well, that's what the camera is. And I wasn't too concerned about it. It's a little bit different to work with, but I think that working with that camera, I was shooting with the 800 millimeter lens, the 600 millimeter lens, and I had the opportunity to work with the new 28 to 400 millimeter lens. So, we're talking about a lighter combination that will do a lot of things that the Z8 will do, and that the Z9 will do. So that was pretty impressive to me. But the low light capability is amazing. I think that one beach day we were there about an hour before, sunrise, and shooting in that low light condition, it just flowed. It worked really well.
I saw that in your video. Actually, Deb's video, First Look, is on our channel as well. And she's probably the only person that shot the Z6III with the new lens with the 28 to 400. So we actually gave her that to shoot while the campaign was on, and it was sort of a secret still. But yeah, it's now that the Nikon's Z line is more fleshed out, and there's more super telephoto lenses and telephoto lenses with zoom, you have a greater ability to frame your subject and get the most out of that 24 megapixel.
Absolutely.
So much more so than 3 years ago. When 3 years ago we had the 24 megapixel with the Z6 II, we didn't have all these super telephotos, believe it or not. They only came out in the last 3 years. So the 800, the 600, the 400, and then the junior ones of those, the 600 6.3, the F400 4.5, and now the new 400 millimeter zoom. Those only really came out in a short period of time, so it's a completely different platform that people are seeing this camera being launched now. And so shooting wildlife, I think it's more favorable to shoot with a 24 megapixel since we have more of these options.
Cool, cool. So I want to jump back to video a little bit. There's, how does the new sensor being partially stacked affect things like rolling shutter and heat management?
Yeah, well, let's talk about rolling shutter first. The rolling shutter is drastically improved in the respect that the rolling shutter is really negated. So, it's a perfect in-between with a fully stacked and a conventional CMOS sensor in that you're getting, for this class, for this price range, top-of-the-line performance. It outperforms everything in this class in terms of minimizing the rolling shutter and the distortion. So I think that videographers are going to be super happy about it. Furthermore, the photographers are going to be super happy about the minimized distortion. So much so that this camera has 2 different shutters. So it's actually the first in our lineup that have 2 bona fide shutters. That's the mechanical shutter and a full-blown electronic shutter. And the electronic shutter can even sync flash up to 1/60th of a second. So it's that fast. And furthermore, with that electronic shutter, what it unlocks is frame rates that would otherwise be impossible to accomplish with just the mechanical shutter. So I know we're talking about stills, but you want to talk about video, but I just wanted to mention that that's one of the bonuses of this partially stacked sensor. But getting back to video, 240 would not be possible outside of this partially stacked sensor. That's the readout of this is fast enough to support 240 frames per second in full HD. So that's one of the benefits that employing this new sensor can give video.
Cool, cool.
Yeah.
And, more on video, there's just a lot of different integrations that Nikon has as well with other companies that make it really great for wedding videographers and stuff like that, like Atomos, in terms of the Bluetooth time code.
That's right, yeah. So, you know, like in a production like this, you can see they're switching cameras, you know, 3 different angles. We got one on me, one on you, and a wide angle. When you're working in those situations, you need to be able to synchronize the cameras. We have a very elegant way of doing that. Rather than just doing a clap track, we have a Bluetooth compatibility with the Atomos UltraSync Blue. So it's a Bluetooth that can sync down to the single frame of these cameras. So imagine you had a production with 3 Z6IIIs. You get a small UltraSync Blue, and that will synchronize these cameras right to the exact frame, and you can cut between the different feeds seamlessly. So when you're doing these multi-camera productions, and if you're a one-man, two-man, small crew, you can accomplish these things thanks to that integration of this. Other cool video features in here, the microphone port has 2 different options, both microphone and line in. So if you have higher end Zoom recorders, mixing tables, you can put that higher level recording right into here. You can record with your boom mic if you're a one-man show right into the camera itself.
Right. And you also upgraded the audio recording as well, right?
That's right, yes.
24-bit?
That's right, yes. And then we also have a flip screen. So I know this is sort of a divisive topic between the photographers and the videographers, but now with the Z6III, we have the front flip vari-angle screen. So people have been asking for this, people that shoot vlogs and even just YouTube videos. So we thought it was appropriate to incorporate this. Screen's really bright, big, high resolution, but we haven't talked about the viewfinder. Should we touch on that?
Speaking of bright, that viewfinder is amazing.
Yeah. So this is one of the highlight features of the camera. It is the brightest EVF in the industry right now. It is rated at 4,000 nits. Prior to this, the Z9 was the brightest at 3,000 nits. And it's a bright sunny day in Manhattan today. And Deb, you shoot a lot on the beach and things like that. And I'll tell you what this means is that, you know, when you're shooting with EVF, what happens is if you're shooting in a bright sunny day, your eye, just like a lens, your iris shrinks to compete with the outside light. And what that means is if you're looking through an EVF that is dark, you know, some of these EVFs only go up to 700 nits, you can't see the details and the shadows and the quality of color. So we really wanted to improve the experience of people shooting with this through the EVF. So they paid a lot of attention not only to increasing the resolution of it and making sure the frame rates was high at 120 FPS, but they even made it the brightest viewfinder at 4,000 nits in the industry right now, even higher than the Z8 and Z9. So what this means is that you can shoot on a bright sunny day and you can look between the outside and in here, and your eyes don't have to adjust. You can see the details and the shadows, the fine details and fine colors. And then the last thing I'll say is that this also has an expanded gamut on the EVF. It's up to a DCI P3 gamut, so you can see more details in reds and greens as that expanded gamut.
Oh, cool. So that really gives you a lot of faith that you're capturing exactly what you're seeing, right, when you're looking through the
Exactly.
EVF?
Well, coming from the Z9, picking up this camera, it just flowed. It was very easy, and brightness was right on target. So, yeah, so people are looking for a camera that will compare to the Z8 and the Z9. This is really going to be right there. It's not as heavy. You know, I'm used to carrying the Nikon Z9 or the Z8, 800 millimeter lenses. I mean, those are pretty hefty, but then you get into a lighter camera, and then it's just not as stressful. You can work for a longer period of time without, you know, getting so heavy.
Right.
It's much lighter.
Yeah, it's also great for gimbals because when you have to move around, you got to put it on a gimbal.
Yep.
First off, the gimbal can only hold so much weight, right? Like the bigger and bulkier it gets, the more challenging it is to balance it, especially on these single-handed gimbals.
Right.
But then, in addition to that, you also have to hold it. So the more weight that you put on that, the more you have to hold, the more tired you get, and it's just more gear that you have to bulk up to support it. So something like this, you can really keep it super lightweight. You don't even need the pro versions of these gimbals in a lot of cases with this, because your mirrorless lenses are so much smaller in addition to the camera body being smaller. So
Yeah, for the viewers looking out there, that is a great point, Jabari, is the fact that you can use lower-end gimbals. And when I say lower-end, I just mean less powerful. And by being them less powerful, they can be smaller. So I have a friend that has a DJI gimbal that is, it's the lower version from the RS3, and it's just so small you can fit it in your backpack, but it can sustain the payload of this camera. And I think for wedding videographers and people that need to be run and gun, they can create content with much more flexibility now because they can, like you said, use those smaller gimbals. So the weight is definitely an advantage when comparing to Z8 or Z9.
Absolutely. Also with travel, because you only have so much space in your luggage, first of all, but also it's just much less intimidating to walk around with. If you have this giant camera, all of a sudden all eyes are on you because they're like, oh, who is this guy coming in? This is like, is there some celebrity showing up?
Are you a photographer?
Right, are you a photographer? You show with something like this and you can do your work without people bothering you as much.
Now, going back from that, for the "Are you a photographer" reaction, we still do have a battery grip for this. So when you do want to look like a photographer, you can still attach this. But furthermore, you can also use it to get the vertical posture and extension and the secondary trigger. Actually, Deb used this on her shoot quite a bit. I think you're used to shooting a Z9, so you want that larger grip, right? I think both from a horizontal but a vertical perspective. I'll tell you, for video, though, this does increase your shooting rate at almost double the lifespan because it can accept 2 batteries. You can even hot swap them. So one battery is inside, the other battery is outside, so you can actually remove one while one is still in there. And you can even use it as a charger, too. So this is the new MBN14. I will mention one thing. For those of you that have the previous generation Z6II and Z7II, we shaved off the contour here, so it's backwards compatible with those models as well. Yeah, so if you have a Z6II and you want to upgrade to the Z6III or get the Z6III in addition to your Z6II or Z7II, this grip will work on all those models.
You guys also have the other grip that's specifically for video shooters as well.
Oh yeah, that's the MBN10. So I got to get my numbers right here. That is an extension, and yes, that'll be compatible with this as well. For video shooters, or still shooters, but primarily video shooters, it's a way of extending essentially the entire right side of the camera. I don't have it with me now, I wish I could show it. But if you're putting it inside of a rig or a tripod or even a gimbal, it's a way of controlling the camera when you don't want to physically touch it or can't physically touch it. Yeah, check it out. That's the MBN10, and a lot of people that are doing video production specifically on our Nikon platform love that accessory because it gives you all the control. And even now with the high-res zoom that we have in these cameras, you can use it as a zoom function as well. So rather than touching the physical lens, we can do a digital zoom. You can do that now on the Z6III as well, up to 1.5 times if you're shooting to 4K. If you're shooting to HD, you can get still a 2 times digital zoom. And it's great because imagine this, if you have a 50mm 1.2, nobody really sees a 1.2 zoom in real life. There's not many of those, if any of those lenses. You can emulate that and make it look very gorgeous by having a wide open aperture, unusually wide open, but still execute a zoom at the same time.
Cool, cool. Did you get to play with this grip at all, Deb?
I did. So not that, just this one right here. Just,
okay.
Yes. So it worked out really well. So a lot of people are intimidated about losing their flow when they're shooting. So if you have the battery grip, you don't have to worry about changing the batteries or stopping what you're doing. So that has definitely come in handy.
I think you probably did you like it for balance as well when you're shooting the 800mm? Did it feel good, or did you shoot a lot of it with just the body alone?
I'd say about half and half.
Okay.
So it was a really good flow, and I'm used to the Z8. I'm used to the Z9. So I'm used to a solid camera. It feels very natural. So having that, it didn't feel terribly different, but I didn't have to worry about the batteries. And I like to do a lot of portrait orientation, vertical shooting. So especially with social media, the platform being so vertical, it really helps.
So something else I thought was interesting, we kind of talked about a little bit before this interview, is kind of like how these hybrid cameras really kind of allow people to learn multiple trades. Like you primarily do photography, but you started to dabble in some video as well, right?
Mm-hmm. I think the camera is a really natural step towards people who are interested in shooting video. So if you have that, especially something like 240 frames per second, so and it's 1080p, so you don't have to do anything. A lot of people if they have to think about going into an application that requires them to crop and do it, then it gets a little intense. This, you don't need to. The only thing you need to do is slow it down, retime it. So it's very simple. So if you retime it, then you can send it up to a social media platform, because of course it's not going to upload in its current state at 240 frames per second.
That's right, yeah. So you get the 240 frames per second given to you at real time. So the camera doesn't slow it down, so you get the option to do it. And it also records the audio as well.
But that gives people a chance to get their feet wet with video, and I felt like that was just really critical. People who are afraid to you go to 4K or some of that stuff scares them. If you just step into it this way and try it, and then really explore that world, and then you can easily step into the world of 4K, 120 frames per second. I was telling Jabari earlier that I fell in love with the world of video. It's just absolutely beautiful. Photography offers a story, but video offers a much more well-rounded story, and I think that's what really stole my heart over the last few years. It's been magical, beautiful.
Yeah. And then also just the fact that it can do both so well, it really just lends itself to people that are kind of learning or just trying to get their feet wet in either industry. Because as someone that started off in the video world, like my first experience with the DSLR was, all right, well, everyone's using these cameras to get this kind of really great, cinematic looking video. But I only got into photography because I was like, well, I already got the DSLR, I might as well give it a shot. And learning how to craft a story in just one image definitely made it much easier for me to understand how to craft a story using multiple images. So it was really great to kind of learn and expand my craft because I had this camera that was very flexible and kind of lends itself to both worlds. And this camera really kind of gives people the ability to jump in at multiple levels. You know, if you want that simple workflow, you have JPEGs and you have the kind of compressed video that's really kind of optimized for uploading directly to social media. But then you also have raw photos, you have raw video, you have ProRes. So kind of wherever level you want to jump in at, it really seems to give you a ton of options.
Yeah, I'll take this opportunity to also just mention new file types that we put in here as well. We started with the ZF, now we've put it into this. This has the new HEIF file type envelope. So you can shoot essentially HLG video as well as a higher dynamic range stills photos. That's with the HEIF format. You can do that both in the HEIF format, but as well as RAW. So the RAW can have an HLG gamut as well. So a lot of different things to play around with the camera. And like, as you said, the ability to go from stills to video is simple on this. If you've never used the Z camera before, there's a simple switch at the back of the camera to go to stills and video, and it takes 0 time to switch from one interface to another. It'll even remember your settings in video as well, whatever your shutter speed was. And the cool thing about the Z6 series is that unlike, say, a Z8 and Z9, it has the user 1, user 2, user 3 positions on the top dial. So that memorizes all your settings, even down to your shutter speed and aperture and ISO and exposure mode that you pick. So I think that's one of the things that people really like about this segment of cameras. It has those quick switches on the top dial.
Cool, cool. So we've got a couple of questions from the audience here that I want to address. First one being, are there any record limitations on the camera?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, because prior to this, the previous generation had a record limit of 29 minutes and 59 seconds. That tended to be really limiting for a lot of people, especially if you wanted to do longer format video like documentaries and things like this. Yeah. Or interviews like what we're doing right now. So that was a really significant limitation. Now with this camera, we can go up to 2 hours and 5 minutes. That is the cutoff point for clips. And it doesn't matter what format that is. You can record that, even at the highest levels, provided that you have enough card space. There's also battery considerations as well, but a lot of the tests for this right now have indicated more than 2 hours of record time. I've seen some real-world reviews just come out this morning from people saying 2 hours and 20 minutes, no problem, on a single battery charge. So conceivably, yeah, you can run this all up on one ENEL15C battery for video.
Cool. Are there? Can you power it externally?
Yeah, this does have.
USB-C?
Okay, so this does have a USB-C terminal. So I think this is new for people that have shot even the previous generation of this. The USB-C can power the camera indefinitely, provided that it's a USB-C on both ends, and you have a proper power source on the other end. So if you were doing a long production, rather than taking, say, the dummy battery at the bottom, you can just power it through USB and be done with it. You can also charge it through the USB terminal as well, so you don't necessarily, if you were traveling, don't necessarily have to take the charger around with you. You can plug it just through the camera.
Cool, cool. All right.
And can I mention, it's also a full HDMI port, something that the previous generation had the minis, and some cameras have micros. For a lot of video people, this is a big sticking point. So this camera does have the full, I think it's Type A HDMI port.
Yeah, that is absolutely something that we'd love to see in cameras. It's just much more robust. It's
secure, reliable.
So many broken cables.
Yeah.
Another question that we have.
And a lot of these tech specs you'll find on the website too.
Oh, can it do any kind of external recording, like directly to an SSD or?
Yeah, there'll be specs for the, you can still output through the HDMI cable. Certainly you can use it for monitoring. I just advertised the fact that we have it, obviously. But the raw recording is relegated to the internal memory card. So you can still get external recording, but it won't shoot out the raw. You do that internally.
10-bit 422.
Yeah.
Perfect. And I guess some people just want a bit more clarity on, who's the ideal customer for the Z6 versus the flagship cameras?
Yeah, good question. I mean, for maybe there's several vectors of people that would look at a camera like this. Number one, people that are looking for a high-performance camera at a certain price point. They might be weekend warriors. You might have people that are. Well, let me just start with almost. This hits so many different angles: portrait photographers, landscape, wildlife photographers, sports photographers, videographers. So when you say what is the ideal customer for this, I mean, I would think about it in this sense. People that don't want any compromise from autofocus, for instance. People that really demand the higher specs for video and that need the security of the performance of a Z8 and Z9, but really need it to be in a more accessible price point. Let me put it this way. People that are shooting DSLR, we have people that are shooting D750s, D780s, even D850s that don't want to let go of their DSLRs because it's proven format, it's reliable, it's highly effective, but they're missing out on all the advantages of the mirrorless camera, namely the type of lenses that we have for this format. You can't shoot a plena on a D850. You can't shoot a 50-1.2, a 85-1.2 on a D750. So what I suggest is, if you're on the fence about moving over to mirrorless in the Nikon world, this might just be the tipping point for a lot of people because it gives them the confidence that they've had with their DSLRs and that autofocus that they've come to desire in low light and surpassed it and outperforms it at this price point at $2,500. Furthermore, people that, like you mentioned with Deb, that might be photographers and want to explore video, this is a perfect platform to do that because it gives them all those advantages to grow into. And even people that are seasoned professionals and maybe want a companion camera for their existing flagship Z8 and Z9, this gives it to them with a familiar interface, but almost little to no compromise. In fact, you get advantages with this camera in low light and high ISO. So it hits a lot of different vectors, is what I'll say. There's a lot of different people that would, I think, gravitate to this.
All right, let me throw it at you, Deb.
Okay.
You have the Z9 right here. You have the Z6 right here. What's the scenario where you're like, the Z6 has it? And, you know, I'd rather go with the lightweight Z6 than with the full-on Z9.
Often when I'm shooting, I'll bring the Nikon Z9 and with a longer lens and shoot video. But I also like a lighter type of rig to be able to shoot a lot of flight shots. If you try a Z9 with the 600mm f4 hand holding, it's a little challenging. So if you get into something like this with the 180-600 or an 800mm lens, it's very easy to handle. So you can get those flight shots. So you're not being weighed down. So I think it's a perfect companion camera, but a lot of people will find it the perfect primary camera because it does a lot of the things that the Z8 and the Z9 does without the weight. So I think it's going to be very attractive for.
Cool. All right.
And maybe I'll tell you one more thing is that the camera also has SD card slots. So I think in answer to your question, when might you think about taking a Z9 out or a Z6III out? For people that just want to shoot to SD cards, that's one of the things that this has, in addition to the CF Express card as well. So the CF Express Type B is what allows us to give you a lot of shots. I don't think we talked about the frame rates in this, but it can shoot at 20 frames per second RAW, 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second JPEG in full frame, and 120 frames per second with a DX crop. Those last three, you can do those with the pre-release capture mode, so either 30, 60, or 120 frames per second. But you know that 20 frames per second RAW, we can shoot that at 1,000 or more images. So a lot of times, cameras come out with these high frame rates, but if you scratch below the surface, there's a lot of caveats. You know, it might shoot it for a couple of seconds. The buffer in this, the processor, and the type of cards we use makes sure that you can use it very practically in any situation and do so for as long as you need to shoot. You know, it might not be 1,000 shots you need to shoot, but certainly you won't be stopped after only a short burst of 1 or 2 seconds.
Okay. Actually, that's actually very helpful because, you know, with the Z9, you have 2 CF Express Type Bs. That's just, in addition to the fact that you're going through these shots very quickly, that's going to use up a lot of storage, right? So, you know, having both card slots be the full CF Express Type B means that you have a lot more shots that you can take, especially if you're doing raw video. Because we shot a lot of Nikon RAW when we were working with the skaters, and our 256 gigabyte cards filled up very quickly. I can tell you that much.
Well, I'll tell you this as well. I mean, we have a new compression technology in here. So all the raw shots that we do, you're talking about stills, right? Stills, or when you said raw, you're shooting raw?
Raw video.
Oh, raw video. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The raw video will take up a lot of space, but I'll tell you this. We have new compression technology, both in the stills and video. I'll tell you first about the video. We have 2 different types of raw in here. It's both ProRes RAW, but also Nikon's NRAW format, which is on average about half the size of a ProRes RAW. Furthermore, we can do up to 6K 60p. So for those people that want to shoot RAW, but they don't like the file size, there are options using our new NRAW technology, and we will release the LUT for that starting tomorrow on our site. We'll also have several different example files people can download to experience the RAW file. As far as stills RAW goes, everything we do now in these cameras is 14-bit RAW because of a new compression technology that we released on the Z9 and that we've now funneled into this camera. So we no longer have this idea of going down to 12-bit RAW. Everything that we do is 14-bit RAW, so we get the maximum tonal range.
Cool. I also appreciate that between NRAW and ProRes RAW, depending on whichever video editing software you like to use, you know, you're able to just jump right in without having to worry about, oh, does my editing software, you know, accept this?
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, if some people like editing in Premiere, they can use, you know, ProRes RAW or, you know, in Final Cut ProRes RAW. Right now, the compatibility of NRAW is with Grass Valley Idios as well as DaVinci Resolve.
That's my favorite.
So yeah, there you go. I mean, it's a free software, really. It's amazing. I've been learning. I was a Final Cut guy, and I've now gotten into DaVinci Resolve, and it's really powerful. And I'm really liking the workflow of the nodes you can use for NRAW.
Cool, cool. And I think the last question that we have time for today is about the GPS. Does it still have the kind of GPS tracking as everything else?
So the GPS, okay, this is a good segue to that because, well, Deb shoots the Z9. The Z9 has GPS. The Z8 and this Z6III here doesn't have a built-in GPS, but if you Bluetooth it to your phone, it can inherit the GPS coordinates from your phone. So there's a free app called Nikon SnapBridge, which you can get for Android or Apple. And you can basically pair your camera to your phone, and there's a little tick. If you tick that you want location data, it'll tag all of your, I believe, not only photo, but video as well with the GPS coordinates. So you can have that as long as it's paired to your phone. And then on that note, I'll just mention, because we didn't mention, this is the first camera in our lineup that will support the new Nikon Image Cloud service. So shortly in the future, it's not live as of today, but in the future, we're going to initiate a Nikon Imaging Cloud service. You can, through that service, upload images directly from the camera to cloud space like Dropbox or Adobe's Lightroom or Google Cloud Service. Furthermore, we're going to have imaging recipes on that cloud service that you can download onto here. Right now, at the launch of it, we're going to have curated new picture controls that people can download onto their camera. And we've upgraded our software of NX Studio starting today for you to create your own flexible color picture controls and upload to this now. So I encourage the viewers to check it out on the Nikon site. If they don't already have it, download the latest version of NX Studio and play around with the flexible color picture controls.
All right, I know I said that was the last question, but I lied.
Okay.
Because there's also pixel shift in this camera as well, right?
There is, yes. So as we were sort of relenting, some people might say, well, 24 megapixels might not be enough for landscape or commercial or still life photography. We do have the pixel shift option in here that can expand your resolution to 96 megapixels. But probably more importantly than that, it reduces moire, it improves noise quality, it actually expands color. So if you haven't experienced pixel shift in either the ZF or the Z8 with the firmware update, you gotta try it on this. And it probably makes this the most flexible camera because you have a reasonable file size with a 24 megapixel when you need it. And then when you necessarily want those higher resolution images, if you're doing a vast landscape or some kind of commercial shot where you need the detail, try the pixel shift function. It comes in several different flavors. You can do stack 4, 8, 16, or 32 shots, and you can get up to 96 megapixels.
Cool, cool. All right. So we've reached the end of our live stream. Any final thoughts, Deb, as one of the photographers that has the most experience with it so far? What are your thoughts on it?
I was really excited to use it, and I was, again, Z6 coming from the Z6 and into, I wasn't sure what direction it was going to lean towards, but it really leans towards the Z8 and the Z9. It has a lot of the qualities, so I think it's going to make a very desirable camera for a lot of people. Awesome.
Well, that's great to hear, and that concludes this live stream of the Z6III. It's a really amazing camera. It's live for pre-orders right now. You can get it at the B&H website. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for answering some questions and sharing your experiences with this camera. And stay tuned to B&H, the professional source for all of your information needs on the latest equipment. Have a wonderful day.